I think we should rename this podcast. We do recap the sermon, but I like podcast with the preacher. I like that better. I think we're going to rebrand it.
Rather than the
sermon recap.
Sermon recap, I know. The sermon recap gets like the smallest percentage of the whole podcast.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, but people like the banter.
Do they?
They like to hear us talk.
Is that what you think?
That's what I'm told. A lady came up to me Sunday morning and said, I just love you and Pastor Brian. I said, well, who do you love more? And she said, well, I can't say. I said, you'd be lying in church. And she looked at me and said, I just think you both are hilarious on that podcast. I said, well, we are.
I think they're smiling at me, but they're laughing at you.
It's been that way my whole life. Really. And you know what? I'm
just
okay with
kidding. Just kidding. You know, in the olden days when we first started this podcast, in the olden days.
Yep. We're coming up on a year.
Really?
October will be a year.
Get right out of town.
Yep.
You always had like these little things in the beginning that you would bring up, like questions or something. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what that was about, but it was something you would do in the beginning that we would sort of get us started. Anyway.
Like random questions?
Yeah, maybe that was it.
Well, I think our relationship has developed to the point now to where we can, just have conversations.
Just go.
I don't have to have icebreakers.
To be quite honest, this should come as no surprise to anybody watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, but if it were up to me, we would only talk about the sermon.
I know, that's why I'm here.
The passage, yeah. So the banter makes me go, if I were listening, I'd fast forward, right?
Yeah.
It's my personality.
But ironically, if you look at what the most watched part of the sermon recap is, it's the banter.
Yeah, I can't handle it. I mean, we do it.
Yeah.
And I think even when you first talked to me about it, hey, here's how we're going to do it. And I was like, I really don't want to, but okay, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
Because you were like, and you were saying it, you were like, just trust me, this is what is going to be interesting. And I was like, okay. But it's just personality differences.
Oh, sure. Well, you and I are very different personality-wise.
Very.
And, yin and yang. Frickin' frack.
Oh, well, let's just stop there.
Peanut butter and jelly.
Oh, my goodness. Here we go.
Speaking of, I had...
Peas and carrots?
No, I'll pass.
Okay.
But I do like succotash. Do you like succotash?
It's food.
Fair.
Yeah.
I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch
Attaboy.
today.
That's one of my favorites.
Begged a really good question. So my wife, whom I love dearly, in an effort to save some money for our family, bought store brand peanut butter. No offense to the people who like store brand peanut butter, but I was accustomed to the Jif.
Jif's like a lot of sugar.
I don't care. I love peanut butter, but she does get the reduced sugar or reduced fat Jif. Okay. Does that help? Is it Jif or GIF?
Jif.
Ooh. You remember that? The GIFs on your phone?
Everybody would say
Are they GIFs or GIFs?
Yeah.
So is peanut butter GIF or...
I'm with you. It's good. It's a great joke. It's a great joke, Kellan. You should tell that. You should tell that a lot to people.
Well, it's a spiritual gift of mine. But anyway, back to peanut butter. So it begged the question, what is so much better about name brand peanut butter than store brand?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is. If it's my brain playing tricks on me. But I think that's the case. So like growing up, we got store brand cereal. Do you remember they would sell the big bags of cereal?
Yes.
So that's what we got. We didn't get a box. We got a bag.
That's right.
But there's a stark difference.
Do you like creamy or chunky?
I like both, honestly. But I usually go with creamy.
Creamy spread's better, but chunky's good. So I'm a peanut butter aficionado. Like I'm all about, because my whole life, remember, I was allergic to chocolate. So for me growing up, candy, sugar, sweet, dessert, whatever was going to be sour, peanut butter, coconut. It's pretty much where my life revolved as a kid. And so to this day, those are the things that I like. So I'm all about peanut butter. We always have a couple different types of peanut butter in the house.
I just like a spoonful.
I'll take a spoonful. I do that all the time. One of my favorite things to do is peanut butter and banana. I do that a lot. Peanut butter and Nilla wafers. Kind of happy
Big
with
fan.
that. Yeah.
The sandwich, or do you just put it on one?
I just grab a Nilla wafer and do my thing.
Like make it a little sandwich.
I can do that too. Yeah. I mean, if there's Nilla wafers and peanut butter, I'm good either way. Peanut butter cake, peanut butter pie, all about it.
Love the peanut butter pie. Mm-hmm. When I was touring, we used to sing at this place in Shipshewana, Indiana. Beautiful part of the country. It's Amish country up there. So the Blue Gate Theater is where we'd sing. And attached to it is a Blue Gate restaurant. I mean, there'd be a couple thousand people at our shows, but they'd come for the food because there's all these Amish ladies cooking This peanut butter pie, I'm not kidding you, is this tall.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So anytime I come back, from that trip, my mother-in-law who lives in Nashville, she wasn't my mother-in-law at the time, but Shelby and I were dating, engaged. She would expect a piece of peanut butter pie to be brought back.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's that good. And the Blue Gate restaurant is amazing.
Yeah, there's a restaurant like that in Kentucky where Amy is from.
Is it Amish country? There's a lot of Amish in Kentucky.
It's more Mennonite in this area.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they have a place like that. No electricity, lights don't turn on. Mm-hmm. So you got to go there during the daytime.
That was like my house every second month.
Mm-hmm. I can relate.
For different reasons. Back to peanut butter. Tommy shared this with me. Oh, no, it was Dan Hooper, his choir member. If you do a tablespoon of peanut butter for bed, it levels out your blood sugar, your A1C, and your metabolism is a whole lot better. You'll sleep better. He had all these scientific reasons behind it.
I wonder, because here's the thing. When you say peanut butter, like let's define peanut butter, right? I mean, because, for example, I like Jif. I like Peter Pan. I like
the Reese's brand.
I'm all about peanut. So let's talk about
peanut.
peanut.
Reese's cup or Reese cup?
Man, that's a good question. I think I say Reese cup.
Yeah, it's a Reese's.
But I don't say Reese's
possessive.
cup. I say Reese cup.
Yeah, but it's possessive.
Either way.
It's Reese's cup.
Yeah. Whatever.
Love, deliciousness.
That it is. Well, but a lot of times when I get peanut butter, sometimes I just want pure, legit peanut butter.
Like the grind.
Yeah, like literally you can make it right there, and they'll have like cashew peanut butter and whatever kind of nut. And I love cashews. Huge fan
Salted,
of cashews.
unsalted?
Typically roasted, salted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like them unsalted.
I'll even get them raw sometimes, and Amy will like make stuff for me,
It's getting that time of year.
Like curry.
Where all the,
Curry cashew's pretty good. I like curry a lot.
I'll let you stick with that. But it's that time of year, like Shelby makes homemade Chex Mix.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Does
So
she call
good.
it like, what is it, like puppy dog?
Well, Puppy Chow.
Puppy Chow.
Puppy Chow is the diabetic Chex Mix.
Okay.
Because it's got powdered sugar and peanut butter. It's Chex Mix, like the cereal.
Yeah.
That you toss
We always end up getting it.
Powdered
sugar and stuff.
and peanut butter.
Yeah.
The Chex Mix she makes, like she roasts all the stuff herself. It's the savory, But it's a good little football snack. Speaking of, NFL kicked off this week.
Did it?
Yeah, you don't care. Well, the Panthers are terrible, if it's any consolation.
Who?
The Falcons lost. But all is right in the world. The Cowboys won.
Oh, you're a Cowboys?
In
How did you become a
convincing
Cowboys? Because you lived there a little
Two
while?
reasons. My pawpaw, growing up,
Yes.
there was a season of time where he lived with us. And it's a long story. Come to choir rehearsal, you'll hear my family stories. He lived with us. He was a big Cowboys fan. And I was probably 10. And so he'd want to watch the Cowboys game. And so I just became big. It was Troy Aikman, all those years. So then we lived in Texas. And because NFL wasn't really appealing to me. Like I grew up
South Carolina.
I grew up in Greenville area. So we had the
Yeah.
Panthers, we had the Falcons. Both were, Deion Sanders was with the Falcons back then. So that was kind of cool.
He's fun to watch.
Yeah, and the Panthers were okay.
They weren't awful in those days. Yeah.
But I just always gravitated toward the Cowboys, America's team. And so anyway, we lived there, and then that was real fun because we got to go to games. Or there was a guy in our church who was one of the big wigs at King, the janitorial deal, and they had the contract for AT&T Stadium, and so he had a real nice field level box
Location, yeah.
Yeah, with lots of free food. That was really good food. So he would let me go to that every
Wait,
night.
why'd you bring up the NFL? Just that it
'Cause
started?
it kicked off. Well, I talked about fall foods,
Oh, okay.
which led to the NFL, which also led to my favorite time of year because the weather's perfect. In the mornings, it's like 60 degrees.
This is your favorite time of year?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I like it.
I love
It's
it.
Amy's favorite as well.
It's about hunting season, too.
Saturday kicks off for bow hunters. I actually got an email from the Department of Natural Resources, DNR in Georgia. Went out to all the registered bow hunters that they are actually asking you please to fill up your tags. Now, let me tell you what that means.
Come to my neighborhood.
I would happily. I'll be hunting in my property this weekend. But anyway, they said please fill up your tags, which means they want you to get, I haven't seen it yet, but $2 or $3 and like 12 doe, and they even have created a link because nobody's going to need to eat that. That's a lot of meat.
That's a lot of meat.
That's a
but
lot.
if you want to get rid of backstrap, I'll gladly take it off your hand.
Well, I'll keep that in mind. So They even created a link, click here, just so you can just donate. Because what's happening is the deer population has exploded in Georgia, and farmers are having their crops
Those
destroyed.
bucks were busy last year, weren't they?
Apparently, I guess the does were too.
Yeah, well, it takes two to tango.
So I'm excited about that. I'll be filling many. I've already got 3 or 4 hunting trips planned, scheduled on the calendar this year.
What do you prefer, bow or rifle?
Bow all day, but
So I grew up quasi hunting. I was a bird hunter. I loved to duck hunt. That was a lot of fun.
Waterfowl.
We didn't have to be quiet. Yeah, and where I grew up near a pond, so we could go off our back porch and shoot if you wanted to. But went dove hunting, all that kind of stuff. I didn't get to deer hunting till much later in high school, early college.
yeah,
First deer I ever killed, doe, killed with a rifle. So I had a buddy, my best friend, growing up. We lived together a little bit after college. He said, "You got to go bow hunting." I was like, "Okay, sweet." So he had a crossbow, and then he had his rate. Well, I used his crossbow because I didn't have one.
Okay.
I went 3 or 4 times, no luck. Used his, no luck. And I was like, no, I don't. I want it for the meat. I don't care. I don't need the trophy. But he swore bow hunting was a lot more fun. It's a lot more exhilarating. The adrenaline rush is better. But he said, you'll hate it until you get one.
I could see that.
He said, when you kill your first deer with a bow,
well, yeah,
that will hook you.
So here's my take on that.
Here's my take
on that. I'm in agreement. For me, I don't mean universally, but for me, bow hunting, hands down, I love it.
Primal, right?
Feels like you're actually hunting.
Yeah.
Typically, if you're rifle hunting, typically you're in a box, and if the radius can be, if you're a halfway decent, shooter with your rifle, dude, 200 yards.
Yeah.
So you're in a 400-yard circumference. You've got plenty. Versus if you're with a bow, to take a good shot in the woods, because I say that because there are people who, for fun, do like bow competitions. We got plenty of guys here who are trophy winners on bow competitions. Steve, George, these guys are exceptionally talented with a bow at 100 yards. Now that's
a long
incredible, but in the woods, you're never going to do that.
Sure.
There's limbs, trees, sticks. Yeah. There's just too much going on. You're not going to, so you wouldn't even take a shot at a deer that's 100 yards away with a bow. With a rifle, oh yeah, that deer's going down. Yeah. So with a bow, you have to get closer to the deer. So just a basic, like I have guys that are friends of mine in other countries, Mexico, Kenya, that are going to be in the States and they want to go hunting with me. And I'm like, okay, there's some things you're going to have to do, because when I go hunting, bow hunting with just me by myself, first of all, I'm washing and drying everything I'm wearing the night before with all the scent blocker stuff.
Do you wear deer urine?
I don't wear it. No, I have it. Estrus, take it with me. But then you get up in the morning early. Just stay up for that matter. But yeah, I'm up at 3:30 or 4, completely bathed with all this deer blocker stuff, the clothes then that I've already washed and dried with all the deer blocker stuff, and then I put it in a bag with a deer blocker towel that keeps the scent, and then in that morning I'm putting it all on, spray myself with the deer blocker, the clothing, get to the site early enough. So,
Amy loves this, doesn't she?
Set up. She will help me the night before, and that's the other thing too. You got to whatever you're going to eat. You can't have it in crinkly paper that makes sound.
Yeah, I learned that lesson. I took a box of Little Debbie's into a deer stand.
Not going to work.
Yeah. Bad move.
And honestly, whatever you take needs to be some kind of a smell that either they're not going to smell or it's going to smell like what they're around.
Yeah.
There's a lot of energy. I really, really enjoy it. And by the time I get there, and whether I'm up a tree in a stand or I'm on the ground in a blind, whereas with a rifle, you're in a box. You don't even need to wear camo. I
kind of like that. Lazy man's hunt.
It's a lot easier. It's super easy. And now here's the thing. I love that too.
Yeah.
I go hunting the most with Clint and George or with Steve. I go with those guys. My son as well goes with me often. But bow hunting, you feel like it takes more time, takes more preparation.
Oh yeah. Bird hunting, because that's what I've done the most of. You're up at 3:30, 4 o'clock, dragging decoys out, doing whatever you need, depending on how extensive it is. But then by 10 a.m.,
you're done.
You're done. You're done. You go back to the house, you have the rest of your day. Take a nap, clean your ducks. Dove hunting, honestly, my favorite.
It's easier.
You have like 7 days.
If it's like a tower shoot,
season,
especially. Yeah.
You just stand in the field. You're talking. You're hanging out.
Okay, get ready,
Here it
guys.
comes.
Here it comes.
Pow, pow, pow.
Yeah, and you're done.
Hit my limit. I'm good. But dove is the filet mignon of the sky.
What they say.
I love dove. Do you eat what you kill?
Always.
Yeah. So you're in it for meat.
Yeah, but I mean, if I don't, it's because I donated it to somebody.
Sure, yeah.
Somebody was like, "Hey, I'll take some." In fact, we had some guys working in the yard a couple years ago. I forget what I had them doing, and they came up and I said, "Hey, you guys want something to drink?" They said, "Yeah." And I opened the fridge. I have a fridge in the garage. Gave them each a bottle of water, and they were like, they asked me something I can't remember, but somehow hunting came up. They said, "Do you have any of it?" And I said, "Any of the meat?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "You want some? Is that why you're asking?" They were like, "Yeah." I said, "How about I pay you in deer meat?" They're like, "Okay." So I did.
Never saw it coming.
I mean, and Amy was so happy because our freezer was stocked full.
It's impossible to eat all that.
That's a lot, man.
I love summer sausage. Yeah, the deer. Summer
From a
sausage.
deer, yeah.
It's so good.
So one of my hunts I've got in November, we're going hog hunting, and that's the one thing that Amy loves is sausage from a wild hog.
Yeah. It's different than what you get at the grocery store.
It's all different. She prefers it. Same thing with deer. I mean, people, some people just do not like venison, period. I like it a good bit.
Yeah.
But it does depend on
leaner.
how you do it. Definitely leaner.
Well, ducks are the same way. Different breeds of ducks taste differently. I prefer wood duck because what they eat is probably the cleanest. And so the meat on a duck, I think, just tastes
Do you
better.
think our listeners are glad to know that this has now become a hunting show?
Well, last week it was a college football program.
That's kind of neat. Yeah. Speaking of college football, I was going to tell you, when you said the NFL started this week and you mentioned the Falcons,
Yep.
our listeners now are well aware I'm not an NFL guy at all. But we were at lunch with some folks, with Brandon and Eli. And Eli really wanted to see the game while we were having lunch. So he had the phone pulled up watching the Falcons game while we were laughing. I mean, he wasn't staring at it. It was just there while we were. But what was funny was they were peeking at the NFL football game. Well, my phone was over here propped up by my cup because I was watching the Speed Chess Championship, World Championship in Paris that was happening. It was the championship game between Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja were going at it, and it was at the exact same time. So I thought, this is kind of funny. My boy Eli's over here enjoying the Falcons game. I'm over here nerding out on the Speed Chess Championship. It was a good match.
Wow.
It's a phenomenal match.
So much judgment toward you right now.
Oh, man, I enjoy it.
Are you a chess guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, more of a checkers guy myself.
In the 5th grade, I started our school's chess club.
Wow.
It's still going, too.
They should put that on your in your eulogy.
They ought to.
I think so.
They ought to, as my cousins
They ought
say.
to. You ought to.
Ought
That's
to.
what my preacher
You ought
growing up used
to.
say. You ought to.
Yeah, that's what my whole.
I was like, what does that mean? Y-O-R-T, yort.
You ought to.
He had all those kind of sayings. Well, back to the original thing, change the name of this to Podcast with the Preacher.
Yeah.
When you were at the Independent Fundamental Church, did they call you Preacher? Preacher Brian?
Yeah.
That's what it was
Yeah.
for me growing up, too.
Yeah.
It was Preacher David.
Yeah.
It wasn't Pastor. Like, he pastors the church, but he's the preacher.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? That was always an odd thing because that was all I knew. And then going to college, experiencing different churches. My religion class at Anderson, we had to go to different denominations to experience it.
Oh, yeah. Same.
And so that was the
Denominations or religions?
denominations.
Just a different denomination.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And so, we didn't go to different religions because
I did that.
I did a world religion class.
And you did that.
Where we experienced a Catholic church, Jewish synagogue, Catholic mass, went to synagogue. They did not make us go to Muslim
I did.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
We didn't participate. We observed.
Well, and candidly, in Anderson, South Carolina, there aren't many mosques.
Probably true, yeah.
You'd have to drive a minute to get to one of those. So, but that was really insightful. But anyway, back to the religion class. Anderson, all the students have to take 101 and 301. And so you have to go to different denominations.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I heard people start calling each other pastor, so-and-so, pastor. It's like, what do you mean they don't call him preacher? And none of the other pastors on staff at my church growing up, they weren't called pastors. It was brother.
Of course. Yeah.
Brother Don
Yeah.
led the music.
Yeah.
Brother Wayne led the activities
right.
and the seniors. Brother Joey was the youth minister.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody had the title of pastor,
Right.
which was so interesting. And then given, the SBC climate the past couple of years, begs the question: maybe we just do away with all of it except for the senior pastor.
I'm happy for my friends to call me Brian.
I want to be called the minister of funk.
Ooh, I think that name's taken though.
Yeah, Bradley Knight.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
ran into you this weekend. I saw Preacher in the Wild on Friday.
a place that we go
Yep.
often, Amy and I.
A place where I went
Yeah.
yesterday, Striplings,
Why do you still have the cup?
because it was in my office.
You just filled it back up?
Okay, this is the little idiosyncrasies of Kellan's personality. My favorite thing in the world is black coffee in a styrofoam cup.
Are you a long haul truck driver or something?
My dad was for a while
Did you get
when
it
he got
from
out of the
him?
military.
Mm.
My papa always drank it from a styrofoam cup. I just think it tastes better. Like, I love gas station
You
coffee.
are kind of a coffee guy.
Yeah.
Like,
At
I brought
any
you back
time.
coffee from Kenya when I was there
And it was
recently.
delicious.
Yeah.
And I'm as much of a snob as I'm not. Like, I love a Chemex or
Do
a
you-
pour over, but I love just Folgers
What do
in
you?
a styrofoam.
Okay, so when you get coffee,
Yep.
we're talking ideal, like your ideal situation,
Okay.
right? So you go to the store, whatever coffee store, whatever. Do you get it already ground?
No.
You get it in the bean,
Yeah.
roasted.
Yep.
You come back, you grind it.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I've got
what
a
is
bird
your
grinder.
really? So what do you make? Do you make a cup of coffee? Do you make an espresso? What do you do?
Cup of coffee.
You're a cup of coffee guy.
I don't mind espresso. Like, we have an espresso machine
Mm-hmm.
that Shelby found on like Marketplace or something, and she loves that.
Okay.
You know, with the pods.
That's
and
my wife.
all
She's
that.
all about
She loves
not the pods.
Okay, y'all. Well, your coffee machine's pretty cool.
Amy got a really nice
Yeah,
one.
you do the straight espresso. And
She
make
makes the lattes. Yes.
Shelby likes an espresso, so it's essentially a cup of coffee, but it's just bougie coffee, and it's flavored or whatever.
But
else.
you want
I want
coffee.
black coffee. Like, I want it to taste like cigarettes.
Okay, so you have a grinder? Because when I was in Mexico a couple months ago doing that conference, one of the people who came are like, they're a coffee company, whatever. Very, very, very boutique.
That's a big deal in Central America.
Yeah. Now, this is a boutique, and they are trying to just really stay in ministry. And so they started this boutique coffee, and they brought me a bag of coffee that the pastor, my friend Kike, that everyone here knows, Kike was like, Brian, this is like one of the best coffees now. It's taking over. People love it because of how they prepare it. I'll just bring it and give it to you.
I would love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like single origin coffees.
What does that
I told
mean?
you I can go bougie, like where the
Single
bean
origin.
is from one spot. So a lot of them will do blends, like a Honduran, Guatemalan blend.
Did not
or
realize that.
different stuff like that. Like you hear all the stuff about Kona coffee from Hawaii. Most of that is a blend. Like, it's not pure Kona.
Okay, so if it's up to you, you want to be able to taste Honduran and then compare it to
Yeah, because they have different
Guatemalan.
notes. Okay, I'll give you a prime example. That Kenyan coffee that you brought back.
Yes.
It is very bright, very acidic.
Okay.
You taste a lot of. No, you wouldn't, because
No, I
you prefer
wouldn't.
creamer.
That's right. I would taste
with
hazelnut.
a splash of coffee.
No, you don't even have to have the coffee in there.
Just straight creamer. But like, Kenyan coffee is very light.
Yeah.
It's a lighter roast. My favorite, I love Guatemalan, just a pure Guatemalan blend. It's medium roast, just full bodied.
Okay.
I think because of the way I grew up, my papa drank black coffee and smoked a Camel unfiltered.
Okay.
And I want it to smell like a cigarette burning and taste like Folgers, But I progressed in my coffee love. So I like a medium roast, full bodied, like the dark chocolate,
What is a
nutty.
medium roast? What does that mean?
So there's a roast spectrum, like
I'm guessing light, medium,
Dark.
Dark, okay.
and then, you can go as dark or light as you want. Lighter roast has more caffeine,
How would you roast it lightly?
not as long.
Just not as long.
Yeah.
So darker, you let it sit for a minute.
So the beans are green.
Okay.
They turn brown in the roaster. Yeah, with the heat.
Interesting. I've always seen these things, never knew.
But I'm also the guy, like, I like a just straight up coffee pot, with already ground Folgers, put 4 scoops in there, water, and let it drip.
Truth be told, if it were
I don't care.
If it were my preference, I would be a coffee pot guy.
Yeah.
Because I want to just grab a pot and have a refill when I want it.
It's much more convenient.
Yeah.
I enjoy the Chemex more because of all the process that goes into it.
Yeah.
And I think it tastes really good. It loses the bite. I'll put it this way. It's like if you pour a soda from a can into a glass, you lose some of that carbonation. It's the same principle with coffee. When you do it with the Chemex, because of how long it takes the process to do it, because it's in a filter, a cone-shaped filter, right? And so you're pouring water in, it's filling up, and then extracting off the bottom of that filter.
Okay.
It takes longer.
Yeah.
So it takes some of the bite out of the coffee.
Okay.
Whereas Folgers is already ground,
Pretty
or
quick.
Maxwell House or whatever. It's just pressurized and going straight into the pot. So I'm an equal opportunity.
You know what I also
Consumer, though.
what I can also do, because Amy's more like you. She's all about she just loves the taste and flavor and smell. And honestly, she even enjoys just the warmth of the cup in her hand. I mean, just that, moment or whatever. But she likes, and I'm good with the French press. It's kind of good too.
Love a French press.
It does have a different flavor. You can tell, like, oh.
Yeah, like there's a restaurant, The Row in Monroe.
Go there all the time.
They'll do a French press for you, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, we are on a first name basis with those folk.
Yeah, tell them I said hi. It was delicious last time. All right, so yeah, I went to Stripling's. This is what I want to say about all this. Stripling's, the coffee is good. The pork chop biscuit, my gosh.
I mean, all of it's good though.
It's a smoked pork chop biscuit. I savored every single bite of that.
Is that what you had when we were with you?
No, I had a chicken sandwich then, but I went back yesterday and got a pork chop biscuit for breakfast.
Yeah, we're big fans of Stripling's.
If I lived closer, I'd be 400 pounds.
Yeah, it's a good thing, right?
Well,
their brisket sandwich, fantastic. Their pulled pork sandwich, fantastic.
I'm trying to give the Lord a challenge in the rapture.
Make it hard for you to get lifted up.
I heard a preacher say that. Independent Baptists, we're against everything except eating. And if a preacher's not 350 pounds, he's probably not doing it right.
That's a fact.
But I heard a guy say that one time, Curtis Hudson. He said, "Now I'm trying to give the Lord a challenge in the rapture, amen.
Yeah.
Bless God." Anyway, all right.
Mark
13. Now that we've talked about lighter issues, go to Stripling's, get that pork chop biscuit. You'll get saved all over again. Mark 13. This is the last week of heavy stuff.
Praise the Lord. In Mark, at least.
Yeah. You just wait till we get to.
I know.
Revelation. Okay, so we're at the latter end of Mark chapter 13. And kind of the big idea from this past week is what I got from it was coming from verse 20. Unless the Lord has shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. All right. So for those of you who have not watched the sermon, I encourage you to do that. It'll provide a lot more context. But I wanted to dig into that verse specifically more than you did on Sunday.
Yeah.
And you spent a good chunk of time on it. But I was left with some questions.
Cool.
The biggest one being, if I'm looking at just purely at verse 20, unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. Okay, so that points us to purely the fact that it is the Lord's mercy that he would shorten the days of the abomination of desolation,
tribulation,
all the stuff that you read on early in the chapter, that we would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, all right, there's a big question mark there for me. Who is the elect? Why are they elect? Why are we elect? Are we going to be spared from absolute annihilation because we're elect? You see where I'm going with all this?
Yeah, so a few things. Let me see your Bible. So who is the elect is a quick, easy way to answer that is Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. There we are. Ephesians 1:4 says, just as he has chose is the same word elect. In the Greek, it's the word eklektos. So just as he has chosen us or elected us in him, Jesus, before the foundation of the world, that we would be holy and blameless before him. So a couple of things we get from Ephesians 1:4 is God did it. God's the one that chose us, elected us, whatever. And he did it before the foundation of the world. So this sticks the toe in the water of predestination, election, and all of that. So why did I not wade into that water? Real obviously, I would have wanted more than 2 minutes to do it.
You need like 2 hours.
It needs to be a full sermon. Yeah. And even then, I probably wouldn't do it. But
well, it goes back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago. When I asked you point blank, are you Calvinist? No. Are you Arminius? No. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And what's happened is in the world of theological debate, people who land in a category, let's say people who are dyed-in-the-wool Calvinist or people who are dyed-in-the-wool Arminian, it's like they want to fight about it.
Sure.
And so I'm happy to have a conversation about it, but even a person who says I'm Calvinist, okay, well, if by saying that, they mean they affirm all of Calvin's teachings, well, then you're going to have some problem, right? For example, Calvin, because he had some crazy things he taught. An example would be Calvin taught that the government, wherever Christians are, the government should have the right to kick in your front door if you don't tithe and take 10% of your property. Okay, so you're Calvinist? Right?
Maybe.
Right. So then if you go, well,
Kidding.
I affirm TULIP, the 5 points of TULIP. Okay, let's walk through that. So not that I want to walk through that right now, but this is why I mean it. Because typically people who are dyed in the wool of one category or the other, there's not really a conversation. It's going to turn into an argument.
Sure. Yeah, you're waiting to prove your point.
Yeah, it's just like now we're in here arguing to show who's smarter than the other one. So for me, I tend to back out of that. And I'm kind of like the Homer Simpson in the clouds. I mean, in the bushes. I'm just like, y'all can duke it out. What I'm going to do is teach the Bible. Yeah. And so if you want to teach John Calvin and you want to teach Jacobus Arminius, you go right ahead.
Sure.
It's not a war that I feel like wading into. So when people say, Brian, are you Calvinist? I go, I don't know. Tell me what you mean by that. Let's define, you know. So, and the answer is no. I'm neither Calvinist nor Arminian nor, I'm just going through the text. So who are the elect? The elect are the saved, so people who are saved by the gospel of Jesus. So then it seems to be, again, sticking the toe in the water of, are we talking about predestination? Well, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4 says God chose people who are saved before the foundation of the world. So
it's hard to argue it. That predestination doesn't exist because Scripture affirms it over and over again.
It's pretty clear. Now, this doesn't mean that if you believe the New Testament, you have to be a Calvinist.
Sure.
I don't like the oversimplification.
Does this fall in the same vein as the perfect will of God and the permissive will of God?
I mean, it's a different debate, but this would be more the debate of, predestination, free will.
Sure.
It'd be more than that. I mean, so... And even the permissive will of God, that's going to run into some issues too with like sovereignty, the doctrine of sovereignty and things like that. But some of the ways that we say things are not because there's a clear Bible verse that affirms it. It's because our finite minds need a way to understand it.
Yeah, sure.
So we would say things like, it's the permissive will of God. Well, there's going to be someone over here going, wait a minute, what do you mean by permissive? You mean God wasn't sovereign over that? And he just said, okay, fine, I'll allow it. You know what I mean? So with the predestination and free will thing, I was having this conversation because in the last 3 Sundays that we've been talking about, going through the Olivet Discourse in Mark, and I say it that way because Matthew records the Olivet Discourse. Luke has something to say about it, but they each cover it from a different perspective. Yep. So right now we're looking at Mark's perspective. And so, and you notice, I mean, you've heard every single thing I've taught on Mark, I think. I don't know. You've been here for the majority of Mark. Maybe I started it before you got here.
Yeah, a little bit. I got here Mark chapter 4.
So notice I'm not bringing in Matthew and his Olivet, or what Matthew said about these passages.
You don't. The cross references you provide are more Old Testament.
Yeah, especially lately with the tribulation stuff. So I'm intentionally doing that because I'm trying to stay true to what God wanted us to have from Mark, right? If I were doing more of a synopsis, then I would be covering the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and I would be looking more into, here's what's going on from different perspectives. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Just with this study, I'm trying to focus on Mark.
That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, so same thing when people go, okay, well, when is the tribulation? And I'm like, well, hang on. Mark's not dealing, not tribulation, rapture. And I'm like, hang on, Mark's not dealing with the rapture right here. Mark's explaining tribulation. So people are like, well, you got to go through the rapture. I'm like, well, I don't got to because I'm focusing on Mark. But the next passage on Sunday, I'll mention the rapture just because it goes in with the return of Christ. So back to the elect. The elect are people who are Christians. So let me just say it this way. If someone is watching this podcast right now and they are a saved Christian by the gospel of
Christ,
Jesus,
born again,
then you are elect. So if someone says, well, what does it mean that I'm elect? It means that God chose you, as it says in Ephesians 1:4. God chose you to be saved before the foundation of the world. That's what it says.
When it is not the will of God that any man should perish, but all come to repentance. So from the dawn of time, before time began, God's God predestined that all would come to repentance.
Yeah. So, and I intentionally didn't go into any predestination thing because that's not even the point Mark was making, right? I mean, what Mark is showing that Jesus was saying, and remember that Jesus preached this message. Peter was present. Peter turned Jesus' teachings into his own sermons. Mark basically followed around Peter, and the book of Mark came from Peter's sermons. Yeah. So
a little bit of secondhand.
Well, and sermons are to make a point.
Sure.
So Jesus would be talking and teaching and explaining. Peter would take, some of Jesus' teaching and make it a sermon. And he was an apostle. He had that right. He had that command to do. And he makes a point. Mark is taking it. I mean, even if it's a direct quote and there's nothing added, because we do know that the Bible is 100% inspired by the Holy Spirit. So it's breathed out by the Spirit of God through the hand of Mark in this case. So it's still a point being made. So to be fair to the whole context, we're trying to keep consistent with the point that we have in Mark chapter 13. Yeah. So that's why I don't camp out too long on every little thing, because this 2-year study of Mark would be a decade study of Mark, So I don't know. Have we answered your first question about who are the elect?
Yeah, for sure. All right. So you bump down to verse 21, and then if anyone says to you, easy for me to say, behold, here is the Christ, or behold, he is there, do not believe him. For false Christ, is verse 22, for false Christs, plural, and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonders, and in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. Okay, so even though the elect are in Christ, they're saved, they are, they belong to God as children of God, they are still going to be attempted to be led astray.
Yeah.
Here's the other question I had. When you preached this Sunday, I had trouble figuring out, will there be some elect that are led astray? Will there not be some elect? Are they? You see what I'm saying? Because if you're elect, you're secure in your salvation. But if you're led astray,
so the quick answer is no.
Okay.
The elect will not be led astray. The way it's worded, in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect, it's kind of like saying, in order to lead astray the elect, as if that were possible.
Okay, so the implication is not, okay, this is possible that some will be led astray.
It's not that, yeah. It's more like as if that's possible. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's not possible.
So that was a big hang-up I had because, okay, that gets into some doctrine of, the security of the believer. Yeah.
It becomes Arminian.
And so then not only do you have this doctrine of Calvinism that hangs onto with the elect, but then in the same, 2 verses, you also argue the counterpoint that Arminians make that it's possible to lose your salvation.
Yeah, it's like verse 20 is Calvinist.
You see where I'm confused?
And then verse 22 is Arminian. Yeah. Right. So, neither. But when people get so anti-Calvinist, back to verse 20, that they don't even want to see the word elect or chosen or predestined in the New Testament, it's like, hey, this, the Bible was written long before there was a John Calvin, right? So don't see everything through that lens. Same thing in verse 22. Now, will the Arminians cling to verse 22? Yes.
Sure.
But in this case, they're wrong. This isn't saying that they could be led astray, because you have to take, when you're doing Bible interpretation, first you focus on the whole unit of thought. It's called a pericope. So one whole unit of thought. Then the chapter, then the book. This is contextually. Well, then the whole New Testament.
Yeah.
And in fact, even between the book and the New Testament, you see if there's any other letter the same author wrote. So like if you were reading something in the Gospel of John, make sure, take it into context with what he wrote in Revelation or in the letters of John. So here we want to keep it consistent with the whole New Testament. And at some point you've got to deal with verse 22 in the light of John chapter 10, that no one can be taken from the hand of the shepherd. So what John chapter 10 is explaining is if you're saved, right? You're not going to lose that.
Yeah.
John MacArthur has a great statement. If I could lose my salvation, I would.
Yeah. If it were up to me,
I'm losing it in 5 seconds is kind of what he says. And so verse 22 is not an affirmation of Arminianism. It's just saying they're going to work so hard to lead people away from Christ. They're even going to try to get the elect to switch sides, as if that was possible.
Okay, so let's look at it in current context. You see someone who You know, I mean, and in the Christian music world, we've seen a lot of this whole deconstruction.
Yeah.
Of, well, pause. Let me go back to something to emphasize the point you just made. Something we talked about yesterday. Our perception is our reality. You know, and I think it's the same argument with Calvinist Arminians. If you want to see something, you'll see it. If you want to not see something, the way our brain works, like you can find a way to avoid it, right? It's the same as when you buy a new car. All of a sudden, you see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
You do, because you're aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's the same, you know, your perception is your reality.
Yeah.
Whether it is or whether it isn't, that's a different conversation. And where, you know, truth becomes relative, that's why you got to cling to absolute truth and be able to trust the Lord to give you perspective to see situations. Anyway, it's Kellan's 2 cents. What was I saying after that? Or before that?
About our the musicians.
Oh yeah, you see this a lot in the Christian music world, especially the past 10 years. Really, this whole deconstruction of faith, where you have people who are committed to the cause of Christ through music, through their artistry, who led a lot of people to a genuine relationship with Christ, who through church hurt, through their own personal struggles, through epiphany or revelation, or not the book, but personal revelation or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, they have deconstructed the faith from their childhood, the faith that they knew. Was that person at any given point truly in Christ then? If they have the ability to deconstruct that and come to a different conclusion as before.
Yeah, well, I think this would be exactly the point Jesus was making when he talked about the parable of the sower and the seeds. And he says, you know, over here some seed fell and fell on the rocks, and a flower shot up fast, but then the sun scorched it and the roots weren't deep and it faded away. You get some people that look every bit Christian, but then when there's some kind of external pressure, you know, they walk away. And so what they show is they weren't really saved. They just really liked that lifestyle. You know, and it's no different than, say, somebody who served in the military for 25 years, and then something happened at the end, and they decide now they're mad at the military. They didn't get their way, or something didn't get decided the way they thought it should have been decided.
They didn't get the promotion they wanted.
They didn't get that promotion, and so now they walk away from the military, and they're going, let me tell everyone all day long how evil the military is and how bad they are. Yeah. And it's like, well, hang on, you were in that world for 24 and a half years and you were fine and loving it. You didn't get that thing you wanted, or something happened that you didn't like. And instead of saying that was an aberration, you decided to blow up the whole system, you know? And that kind of thing happens in the church world often, you know? And I even see it, you know, golly, I'm thinking of actually people that I know that when they were in the church, they were great. And then some kind of life change happened.
Yeah.
And now they're like atheist and they're hostile and they're trying to prove everyone how atheist they are, you know, by living as far from God as they can. And it's like, okay, well, could the person just simply be in a prodigal sense? I don't know. Let's see how the story ends in their life. Or is it that they had a crush on that girl who was in the church?
Yeah, convenient Christians is what I call them.
So they're very serious about Jesus because they really want to catch the attention of that girl. And then when, you know, things change.
Noble strategy, all right? Noble strategy.
The whole evangel dating type of thing. I mean, so I think it's hard to say until you see the end of the story. Because in the prodigal son's parable, it's like he was in the house of the father, he's in the family. He gets old enough, rejects the father, wants his inheritance now, and goes and lives an ungodly lifestyle. It's the whole point of the prodigal son. Then the son came back, and it's like, you know, throw a celebration, he once was lost but now is found kind of thing. Well, that's the gospel, right?
Sure.
But you have to see the end of the story to find out about that prodigal son. If he'd have died while prodigal, everyone would have said, oh, he never was really saved.
Okay,
right?
So let's take that story for instance. Yeah, I mean, it's a parable. It's an image of the gospel. It's an image of the Father's love for us. You know, my favorite line in that whole ordeal is that the Father saw the Son from afar and went running to get him, something, you know, dignitaries in that day did not do. Right. What gets lost in so much of this, you hear a ton of sermons on the prodigal son. You rarely hear stuff on the other brother. Right. The older brother.
Many people now call it the parable of the older brother.
Yeah. Because what's so interesting about that, for me at least, for most of my life, I was the older brother, you know, and then I had a prodigal moment. I didn't walk away from the faith, but I kind of got disillusioned with it, you know, because of the way I grew up and all the stuff that I dealt with. But all that to say, looking at the life of the older brother, does that make him any less favored in the sight of the Father than the son who left and came back?
I don't think it makes him less loved. I mean, in the parable, the older son, the older brother, whatever, it was Israel, right? Because they're like, what do you mean? Why are you going after the Gentiles when I've stood by
We've been
your
here
side?
the whole time. Yeah.
So you got to be careful not to overly explain a parable.
Sure.
Because typically 1 or 2 points is being made and that's it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and we tend to think we're the hero of the story.
Always, we read ourselves
know?
into it as the hero. Yeah. We're David who defeats Goliath, that kind of thing. But as far as your question, like what about those who were in the faith and then walked away? It's like you have to wait till the end of the story. I mean, the quick and easy human thing to say is that person was not truly saved.
Yeah.
They were in the church and it fit their lifestyle in that moment. But back to the parable of the sower and the seeds, you know, when the pleasures of the world, the sun rose over them, they were more interested in what the world can offer than what God can offer. And hopefully they live long enough to have their life turned back to God.
Sure.
And they reject the ways of the world. And a lot of people do, but some don't.
Yeah.
So,
okay, on a very practical level, I'm sure folks watching, I can identify them in my family. I'm sure you can as well. As a follower of Christ, what's a godly way to handle a situation like that, whether it's a family member or a friend? I mean, I can point to so many circumstances and situations in my own life and that I watched growing up where my friends' parents would come to church and then they'd get away from the church, and instead of people in the church kind of going after them to say, hey, come back, you know, it was just kind of, well, you left, see ya, you know, kind of turn them over to a reprobate mind. What's the godly way to handle that if we're in the situation of having someone we love, someone we care about, their priorities shift? They walk away from the church because it's not convenient for that stage of life anymore. How do we pursue them in a godly way?
Yeah, I think there's some nuance to it. I mean, if the person just simply walked away, then keep reaching out, keep showing love, just like the father in the prodigal son story. If the person is, you know, they're living an extremely sinful lifestyle and there's been multiple attempts to try to bring them back. I mean, what does it say in the book of James that you would save their soul from death? You know, I mean, you who are spiritual. So I think if in that situation, let's say somebody has become extremely sinful, because there is the part about, you know, where Paul said he handed people over to the devil, right? They've rejected the church, rejected Christ. They've become anti-Christ. They're, you know, taking shots at the whole gospel thing. Then that's a person that needs to leave the church. That's a person that needs to be outside the church because they're going to create disunity, disruption. They're going to cause a lot of trouble. So that's a person you could have a conversation with outside. But I mean, when you look at all the ways of Christ, and he was showing love, and he was the woman at the well is always a favorite passage that I go to with how he was being with her. Now the church didn't exist then, right? But God did, obviously. So maybe she knew the right way to be. Maybe she knew the right lifestyle. Maybe she'd grown up in synagogue. You know, maybe she knew the Torah. But either way, Jesus was extremely compassionate and kind to her. He didn't just simply ignore and reject and that kind of thing. And I get stuff like that sometimes when I get families that come to me because their son or daughter has done this. They've walked away from God and church, and they often want me to meet with their son or daughter. I always am willing to. I've even had some that have brought that son or daughter to sit down with me and talk it through, but it's difficult because it's almost like the people think maybe I've got that magic sentence that I'm going to say that's going to turn that son or daughter around and suddenly make them a Christian, and it just doesn't work that way. Typically, when someone grew up in the church and they walked away, there's a reason. Often it's like there's some kind of pain they went through or hurt they went through. A lot of times It's because they respected their mom and dad, but then when they got old enough, they began to realize mom and dad are not good Christians.
Yeah.
This is all a lie. When we get to church, mom and dad act like sugar would not melt in their mouth. They're so sweet and tender. But when we get home, they're a holy terror, and they're cussing and drinking. And I'm not saying anything against alcohol, but they're getting drunk. They're, at church acting one way. They're at home acting another. They're, and so what often happens for the child who goes prodigal in that sense is Christianity was defined as a little child by mom and dad. But when they become adolescent, preteen, teenager, and adult, now they go, it's all a scam.
We've had that conversation on this podcast where, as children, we tend to see God the Father through our earthly fathers.
It's designed that way.
And to see the character of Jesus through our mothers, in that nurturing, type way. And then as we get older, again, going back to what we said earlier, perception is reality. And as our perception shifts, as our perspective shifts, as our minds are developing and enlightened, and as we, encounter things in life on our own, we tend to see things a little bit differently. And I mean, I'll be 35 next year, and I look back at so much of my life with my parents that, I thought was one way, and becoming a parent myself gives me a little different perspective. And, living a life as an adult gives me a different perspective, for the things that they were dealing with and things they went through, good, bad, and different, doesn't matter. And I think that happens, I see that a lot with students. When I was in college, I led worship for a lot of different student ministries, and saw that in particular where you'd have, there was like an age, up until about 14, 15, you saw kids like really embrace faith and embrace church and live for the youth group, right? Like this is mid-2000s. So Facebook and social TikTok and all that stuff, wasn't really existent. So church was your social time too. And then you learn how to drive, you get some freedom, and it goes a little further. And by the time they're 18, 19, suddenly they're agnostic in college and, protesting everything for fun. And I was like, man, I for a long time, I wondered, like, how did that happen? Like, what in the world? And it goes back to this passage. It goes back to what we're talking about. Like, how did someone who I thought was very strong in their faith slip so easily? Not only did their perspective and their perception changed, but when the freedom came and the things of the world were of easier access, they were led astray. And who knows how that road comes back. I mean, I had a conversation with a friend of mine from high school that I hadn't talked to in several years. And it was interesting to hear how perspectives have shifted, as they've gotten married and had kids, and how, the way I saw them living in high school was very different than the way they're living now. Because life has a funny way of coming full circle. But
I think with people who, it's very normal for a person to grow up, and when they get freedom, whatever, they get car keys, they get their own car, they get a job that's more than just something, part-time for 10 hours a week while you're at school. They're getting a real job with real money and all that. It's very normal for that person to want to go experience something else and go experience life in a different way or a different setting. There are some people that are just very naturally, they want to gain all their own knowledge instead of just living the way mom and dad said, And so, I mean, when we were in Germany, people were like, it's so weird that you would come visit Germany. This is Germany. We want to go visit America, But all of us who are Americans are like, we want to go visit Germany and see what it's like. So it doesn't matter where you live, where you're from. Now what is interesting is just like the prodigal, there's something that happens later in life where you want to come home, So, I mean, there are songs about that. You grew up and you wanted to go to the bright city life, and then after a little bit of time there, you're miserable, and now you want to come back home to the farm. I mean,
I lived that. I mean, moving to Nashville, touring the world was awesome. And then after about 3 years, like there was just something in me. It's like, ugh.
Well, you've had the taste, and you didn't care for it.
No, because what you find out is it's all the same. There's bigger world, bigger problems, but it's that draw toward home geographically in your heart, to be closer to, your family of origin or whatever that is. That's very real.
Well, I'll tell you, this could be something encouraging, or I'll try to encourage parents who are having a struggle with their son or daughter who might have gone prodigal. one of the things that I would say to moms and dads is, first of all, you've always known, if you're a Christian, you've always known that your child can't be saved by your faith,
Yep.
right? They have to have their own faith.
Yep.
They're not going to have faith if it's because you're threatening them they had better be Christian and they had better go to church. Like that, they're also not going to go to heaven because of your threats, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes
can't scare them in there.
You can't scare them in, convince them in, talk them in, threaten them in, threaten to take them out of the will. That's not going to get them saved, right? So with my son and my daughter, Amy and I, we have these conversations all the time, and we've had these conversations since they were born. Is we pray and hope that they're going to become Christians, right? Obviously, we pray and hope that. In our home, we lead a Christian home. Their friends come over and they go, wow, we love being at your house. It's just different here. And some of them would even share with us what it's like at their home, sharing even things that they shouldn't have shared because it's embarrassing to their parents, and we know their parents. And so we would often tamper that down and go, hey, you know what? When you're here, just be here. Don't feel like you need to share anything like that because, it could be, it's just divulging stuff that you ought not divulge. But we also knew that when our kids got car keys, their own vehicle, money, like a job, we also knew that at that point, it's like the majority of our job is done. Like we've raised them, and when they had bad experiences at church or churches, we had to walk them through, this isn't Jesus, this isn't Bible, this is a human who's at the church, right?
Yep.
So there are times even now when Amy and I will be aware of something that our son or daughter are, doing, or a place where they are. And of course we reach out, we call, we text, where are you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
When,
you have Life 360.
I mean, we have really good conversations with them, but we don't, what do they call it? Like the helicopter parent thing. We don't do that. We don't threaten them. We have good conversations with them. And my kids both know that no matter what they do, truly, we won't stop loving them. Our love for them is not like a bartering tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the biggest impact in our kids' lives. And so ever so often, someone will say to us, hey, you may not know, but let me tell you what your kid is doing. And it's not necessary, Like what would that information do?
Yeah.
Right? Like let's say you do know something that Amy and I didn't know that my son or daughter did. So, right? Like that's not a factor in my love for them. It's not a factor in my parenting of them. It's not
you raise your kids, I'll raise mine.
I'll take care of it from here, I mean, so I say all this to the mom and dad whose child might have gone prodigal. You had better just still love them the same way the father of the prodigal son loved, and I think that's the big example for us. I mean, Jesus talks about,
for sure.
I mean, you read the book of Romans, Israel went away, Israel comes back. God welcomes them back. God continues to pursue them. God continues to love. So
that's a weird tension to manage. I mean, my family, we have that situation, where we have a prodigal, one of my siblings, and, me, who's kind of stayed the path, had some deviations now and then. And man, as a younger man, watching all this unfold early on, it was hard to watch how both my folks went out of their way to show love and care for my sibling who had gone. And it was hard not to be bitter. I mean, when I told you, I felt like the older brother, like I've lived that life, right? Some perspective has changed that. Some life has changed that to say, my parents didn't love me any less. They just loved me differently, and the things that they had to love me through were very different than my brother or my sister or my stepbrother or stepsister or any of that. So it's what I would encourage parents with as well is that's a difficult tension and something that you've got to continuously be in the Word of God and praying through is managing, how there is no lack of extravagance for the Father's love for us, of the Father's love for us. He pours it out extravagantly. There's nothing that he holds back. But when you have both kids, one who's doing, quote, the right thing, one who's kind of off on their own, that's a difficult tension to manage. But my admonition, my encouragement to parents who are dealing with that is man, just stay faithful, love both, know that they're going to be different, know that the love is going to be different. And with some time and with some perspective, the one who has kind of stayed the course will realize, okay, this is just a matter of fact. Like that's just the way it was. And to see that I can honor both of my parents in a way that is pleasing to the Lord, but also pleasing to them, just say, man, they did the best they knew how at that point in their lives. And just, what shifted my perspective is becoming a parent. Yeah. I hope my kids don't look back at, their grown up years and think, man, my dad was terrible and he was just I'm doing the best I can, and just inserting the humanity into it has given a lot of grace. But also helped me understand how much deeper and richer the Father's love for me is. There's a great book coming out that I've read part of on released today, September the 10th, Learning to be Loved. The guy who started Hobby Lobby, Mark Green, wrote it. And it's just his journey of learning how to be loved by God outside of the mechanism of performance, outside of the mechanism of, straying away and having that dramatic comeback moment. And so I recommend it. We'll put the link to it in the show notes, but even tying it back into the passage, we got off on the little prodigal son thing, but tying it back into here, like knowing that as elect, we as ones who are never out of the grip of God's hand can rest in his love for us, knowing that in his mercy, he will shorten those days for us. And you got into in your sermon, whether it's through getting us out of here or through death or whatever it is, it's his mercy that does it. But I love verse 23, but take heed, behold, I have told you everything in advance. And man, that verse right there, I sat there Sunday reading that. I'm like, God, just the love that you have for us to give us a heads up, to know that it's going to be bad, but to know that, hey, you're going to be okay. And that's the hope. And the biggest takeaway I got from Sunday's message is like, man, no matter how bad things get, the fact that Jesus told us what was going to happen when he didn't have to, he didn't owe us that, is enough for me to rest in his promise that he's going to take care of us no matter what.
Yeah, 100%. And that is the thing. For me, the great eye opener was in a previous Sunday, it was 2 Sundays ago, about those who are being handed over to be persecuted, handed over to the courts. Don't worry what you're to say when you're standing in front of these people, because the Holy Spirit will give you what you need to say. Remember that?
Yep.
And then I made the point, just because the Holy Spirit's giving you what to say doesn't mean you're going to be found innocent.
Sure.
You're still going to be martyred.
Yep.
And I made the point at the end of that sermon, God is not preparing you for jail. God's preparing you for martyrdom, right? And so as terrifying as that sounds, it actually sounds like a bad deal. If you're talking to...
Not what I was expecting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking to someone on the street, it's let me tell you why you need to get saved. It's not so that you can be martyred. You're never going to present that in a gospel sharing conversation. That's later. We get to that. Yeah. First, let's just...
Have you heard about Jesus? By the way, you're going to die.
By the way, if you come to Jesus, you're going to get martyred. Yeah. No one's signing up for that.
Sorry, what?
But the reality is, once you are a Christian and you start to understand, for example, eternity, right? Even if you live to be 120 here on earth, it's this compared to all of eternity. Yep. So it takes so much maturity and faith to get to that perspective. I'm not saying I have a lot of mature faith. I'm saying that's what it takes. Yeah. And so, there's plenty of times that I get bothered and annoyed by whatever it is that I'm going through. And then usually it's Amy that goes, honey, remember, we do not war with flesh and blood, right? She says that kind of thing to me all the time. And I'm like, yes, thank you. That's a good reminder,
Well, I love what the psalmist says too. Teach us to number our days. That our time here is so short that when we look for the good in every situation, when we look for God in every situation, we'll find him. We'll find him.
I call it learning to look through a heavenly lens. Today I had lunch with a friend who was talking to me about Israel, what's going on in the Middle East, and he handed me something to read, and I had to take off my glasses to read it. And he laughed. He goes, "You took your glasses off to read it?" And I said, "Well, when I put them on, I can see you.
Yeah, sure.
When I take them off, I can see this, right?" And he was just kind of laughing. Part of becoming a good Christian is learning to look through a heavenly lens, where you start to understand that what you see has to be filtered through the eyes of heaven. It's not at all. It's the hardest thing to do ever, but that's where Christ is trying to get us. And that's what I love about Romans chapter 8, that he predestined us to become conformed to the
favorite
image
chapter
of his
in all
Son.
of Scripture.
Yeah. I mean, our predestination, if nothing else, is to be conformed to the image of his Son.
Sure.
So whether we live to be 20 or 120, it's the sanctification of predestining or getting us to the point of conformation to Jesus. And that's our prayer and our goal. That's what I pray on Sundays often before the sermon. So anyway.
Well, and the hope we have is the return of Christ is soon. It's imminent. We don't know the day. We don't know the hour. Only the Father knows. But after all the horrible things we just read and learned about, come this Sunday to hear about the return of Christ. So gets a little happier.
Thankfully.
So I'm pretty pumped about that. We got a great worship set planned for you at the 9 o'clock and the 11 o'clock. So you'll want to be here. If you can't join us in person, online, YouTube, or churchonmain.net, you can watch the service in real time. You can go back and watch it later. What else am I missing? Is that all? Holy Smokes Car Show, end of the month.
It's going to be so fun.
So that's going to be a lot of fun, 9 to 2 p.m.
Yeah, it's over. You still have the whole day.
Yeah.
I mean,
nice.
It's over by 2. That's when all the awards and the winners are announced. Yeah. So come be part of that. You know, we're not doing that just because we like cars.
I like the name.
The name is cool. You know who came up with that name?
Who? Who? I'm sorry.
Holy smokes.
We need you to tell the story on the podcast, what you told me yesterday about getting your ticket and having to go to the defensive driving class, and that's why you were driving so fast.
Let me tell her right now.
Well, yeah, I just told like 3/4 of the story.
25 years ago, I got a speeding ticket. Certainly not my last speeding ticket.
Yeah.
But
and this was all precipitated by him passing me, driving like a bat out of where.
Pretty sure I blew your doors off.
Oh, my. And I looked, and I knew it was his truck, and if I wasn't a Christian, you would have gotten a nice little gesture.
Were you on this side? I went by on that side.
Absolutely. And you passed me in the right lane, which made me so mad.
You were driving too slow.
I was following the guy in front of me.
Like a girl or something. Wow. Anyway, so what happened was I got a ticket. I was probably 20, 25, I don't know, a long time ago. And had to go to one of those speeding classes.
That was half your life ago.
Yeah, seriously, it was a long time ago. So it was one of those classes, and I went to it, and there were like 50 of us in the class. Every seat was taken. And the lady teaching it introduced herself and explained, she was like a no-nonsense kind of personality. And she said, I've been teaching this for 35 years, da-da-da-da-da. And part of like this first thing we had to do on day one, every person had to go through one by one, say your name, say what your speeding, like if it was 50 and a 45 or whatever, say what your difference was of mileage that made you get a speeding ticket. And then you had to share why you were speeding. I was the dead last person to go. Just from where I sat in the back right of the class. And everybody had reasons. I was late for work, late for a meeting, on the way to, some had like a hospital explanation, wife was in labor, whatever it was. Everyone had some explanation until she got to me. And I remember it so clearly. All I said, she said, okay, tell me your name, why you're speeding. I said my name, and I said, I was just speeding. I said, I don't really have a reason. I just like to drive fast. And that's exactly what I said. And people kind of chuckled. And I remember the lady kind of walked toward me and said, I've been doing this 35 years. You're the first person to ever say that. She said, you're the first person to ever tell the truth.
Yeah, right.
Is what she said.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And everyone laughed. And but yeah, I'm from Charlotte. I'm a NASCAR fan. And, I might put the hammer down, man.
I did.
Let the horses run.
So I did catch up to you, and I was behind you. And I noticed you have no rear view mirror on your truck.
You know what happened?
What happened?
It started to wobble. So I went to adjust it.
Boom.
Fell right in my hand. I was like, what? So I went to this place to get like the glue. And they were like, oh, we can't do the glue on your windshield. You got to get a whole new windshield. Yeah. And I was like, how much is a new windshield? They're like, call your insurance company. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So somebody gave me a number of a windshield repair that's like $400. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll get around to it.
Anybody feels led to donate a windshield to Pastor Brian?
I don't have a rear view.
It looks like he got mad and ripped it off.
Yeah, no, I barely even touched the stinking thing. I mean, it was wobbly, and I went just to adjust it to where I could use it.
Yeah.
Came off in my hand.
Like you don't drive a brand new truck or anything.
No,
it's
2011.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm behind him, and I notice these wires hanging. I'm like, what in the world?
What is that?
What happened to your rear view mirror?
Yeah. Yeah. Not only that, I let somebody borrow my truck and they wrecked it for me.
Someone who will remain nameless.
Yeah, someone who should remain nameless. I'm not allowed to share. And so my bumper's dangling and the left rear quarter panel's dented in a little. Yeah. And whoever it was that did this for me, that wrecked my car for me, took it to the repair shop and brought the quote, like $2,000. Nope. I'm like, not going to happen.
That about total your car.
Seriously. I love my 2011
Well, it's got like 200,000 miles on it.
Exactly. I like my pickup. And
it's a truck. It's supposed to be beat up.
Seriously, it's like, I use it when I go hunting. My son was like, Dad, you should get an Apple CarPlay in it. And I said, well, call your buddy, see what it would cost. $1,000. Nope. I was like, not happening.
Nope.
No, I'm good with my AM, FM. I got Bluetooth. Daddy's happy.
Yeah, you're one generation of truck away from a cassette player.
Seriously. Yeah.
I will say the favorite vehicle I've ever owned in my whole life was a 1987 Chevy Silverado.
Made them the way they used to, man.
Big block 305.
Seriously, man.
Bench seat.
They don't make them like
had
that
a cassette
anymore.
Player in it. Oh man! But the buttons for the radio, like you had to push real hard.
So were you? That was before your birth. You weren't even born.
Yeah. So it was my grandfather's truck.
Yeah.
He had it. I mean, it was just beat up, you know. And so he and I were trying to restore it. Well, he passed away when I was 14, and so when I got to driving at age 15,
look at you.
I got it. So
very cool.
I love that thing. I flipped it 3 times.
Ooh,
that's a separate story.
It's another time.
Anyway, thanks for joining us. We love you. Appreciate you. Can't wait to see you Sunday as we talk about the return of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
See you. Have a great week.